Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the next Navigating Decarbonisation series webinar. And we're going to be looking at operational efficiency and the Blue Visby Solution. So obviously, operational efficiency has become quite a focus in that navigating decarbonisation piece, offering immediate system-wide reductions in fuel use and emissions without the need to wait for alternative fuels or future technologies. And the Blue Visby Solution is part of that shift, and NorthStandard is a member of the Blue Visby Consortium. So we wanted to give our members and brokers an overview of what Blue Visby Solution is, and to gain insights from experts in this area as well. So during today's webinar, we're going to cover what the Blue Visby Solution is and how it works in practice. Also how operational efficiency measures can deliver real-world emission reductions straight away. And obviously, as I say, we're going to have insights from leading experts in this area. So in terms of the format, we'll start with presentations. There's going to be an overview of what the Blue Visby Solution is. So I'll go talk through some slides, and then I'll be passing on to Harris Zografakis, one of our guests. We'll then move into a panel discussion, so that'll really give an opportunity to bring those perspectives from our guest experts. And there'll also be a live Q&A where you will also have that chance to engage directly with our experts. So we hope you find that this session will be insightful and also practical and useful for you. So before we start, I'm just going to do some introductions. So I'll introduce myself first. My name's Sarah McCann. I'm a senior solicitor in the external affairs team at NorthStandard, and I'm also a member of the decarbonisation expertise team here at the club. And so I'll be kind of hosting today's session, and I'm delighted to be joined by two guest speakers. We have Harris Zografakis of Stephenson Harwood, and also Paolo Della Moglie of the Tynall Centre for Climate Change Research at the University of Manchester. So I'm now going to pass over to our guests so that they can give introductions of themselves and their involvement in the Blue Visby Solution. So if I could come to you first, Harris.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you might be. Some of your guests, some of the audience may know me as a maritime lawyer with Stephenson Harwood in London, but I'm here to talk about the Blue Visby Solution. If I may take the slides. The Blue Visby Solution, where I'm a coordinator of the Blue Visby Consortium. The consortium started life about 4 years ago. NorthStandard is one of 44 members. It has progressed from a concept to a project to a deployed solution, and this is really the focus of today, not so much to explain the history, but to talk about where we are with the deployment. Now, the overall topic is, of course, optimization. And many of you on the screen today, whether you're ship owners or managers, you're involved in optimizing your individual ships. And I have on the slide a series of measures that ship owners typically take. They all involve improvements to the hull, to the ship, to the main engine. They all involve capital expenditure, CapEx, and they all involve benefits, usually in the single digits. That's all fantastic. But the point here is that all of those interventions are focused on the one ship. But the largest carbon inefficiency, or we can call it a fuel inefficiency in maritime trade, is not about individual ships, it's about the system. And what I am describing is the operational practice of vessels that leave from a port of origin towards a port of destination without reference to the conditions at that port, without reference to the other vessels steaming to the same place. That practice that we call sail fast and wait is responsible for 20% of the carbon footprint of shipping, or we can call it 20% of the fuel spend of shipping. Now, that's important not only for today's fleet, meeting efficiency and carbon intensity targets for today's fleet, but it's also important to the deployment in the future of alternative fuels, all of which are costly, scarce, and have low energy density. Within the consortium, which has grown to 44 participants, over the last 3-4 years, we have raised awareness, prepared studies, refined the concept. We have conducted a series of virtual pilots and a series of prototype trials, leading iteratively to deployment almost a year ago. Members of the consortium, you will recognize some of the important names in shipping. It can be associations like the Baltic Exchange or BIMCO. There are ship owners like MOL. There are charterers and traders like Marubeni, like Anglo-American, classification societies, as well as port authorities. You may spot on the screen the Port of Yokohama, the Port of Rotterdam, the Port of Newcastle in Australia. But I would also point out the Panama Canal Authority, because of course Panama Canal also has its own sail fast then wait problem. The consortium is recognized as one of the leading decarbonisation initiatives over the last few years. And a very important accolade we're very proud of is that it is endorsed and supported by BIMCO. And you see on the screen what the former president of BIMCO said at an interview with the editor of Lloyd's List, which I think is very important. And perhaps it will make sense as we progress why he says what he says. BIMCO also submitted to the IMO a formal paper, and I will share that, or Sarah will share that after the webinar, with details of our studies and details of the sail fast and wait as an issue. Now, why is this so difficult to solve? Why have we not solved it already? The reasons can be split into two categories. And it's important to identify the problem so that we can then describe why Blue Visby is a solution and why it is a different solution to what we have tried before. First of all, it's an operational problem, and it's about the role of the ports and the role of ships and the interface between them. And what I describe on the screen may sound a little bit extreme, but I think it's important to be blunt about it. Ports and terminals do not optimize for ships. They optimize for their own needs, very justifiably, very fairly, and they do that by reference to their own preferred lineup arrangements. Some ports and terminals operate a lineup, sometimes we call it a stem. Some ports and terminals operate first come, first served. That's how they choose to organize their affairs, and shipping has no influence in that. Now, the second category of problem, nothing to do with the first, is commercial and I dare say contractual. It is the problem that ship owners and charterers have conflicting financial interests. Economists call it the problem of split incentives. And that is especially acute in voyage charters, where waiting at anchorage means income for the ship owner in the shape of demurrage. So how does the Blue Visby solution address those two issues, those two problems? Starting with the operational problem, the main innovation of the Blue Visby solution is to accept that we in the shipping industry have no influence in how ports operate. So instead of trying to optimize berthing, which is a matter that involves the ports and the terminals, we opt, and it's a choice, we opt to optimize for the ocean passage alone, treating the shifting, the short journey from the anchorage to the berth, as a last mile problem that is left in the hands of the ports and the terminals to fix. In so doing, we deliver a large part of the benefit, but without interfering with ports and terminals, because they wouldn't want that, and they do not want that. So that is the innovation of Blue Visby operationally. And in the studies I mentioned at the start, simulations, high-class simulations of hundreds of thousands of voyages performed by the data team of Blue Visby have delivered studies that demonstrate a benefit in optimizing the ocean passage as opposed to optimizing berthing in the double digits. You see on the screen types of ship, ballast and laden condition, consistently double-digit savings by optimizing the ocean passage. Turning now to the second problem. Unrelated to operations and everything to do with business and contractual, how can we make ship owners and charterers, if you like, play nicely together? How can we persuade them that if they collaborate, they can reduce or mitigate the problem of sail fast and wait? So what we have done within the Blue Visby solution is to create a common financial interest for both ship owners and charterers through the sharing of the benefit, the financial benefit of fuel savings. How is that possible? Because the Blue Visby solution delays the arrival at the anchorage. It does not delay berthing, it only delays the arrival at the anchorage. And the financial consequences of that are shared between the ship owners and the charterers in a way that is transparent, neutral, and consistent every time. And that system is inspired by general average, which is why then we call it Blue GA. An example of how this works in practice, on the screen you have a simplified profit and loss account, P&L, of a vessel that did a Blue Visby voyage ballasting to Australia. She was a Supramax bulk carrier under a voyage charter. If you see on your screen, the left side of the column shows business as usual for the charterer. The vessel sails fast. There's demurrage that the charterer pays of 69,000. The charterer doesn't care about fuel savings. It's a voyage charter. So the charterer has lost 69,000 business as usual. If you now go to the owner's business as usual position, the owner receives 69,000 in demurrage. There is no fuel savings because the vessel sails fast and wait, and that's his net financial position. Now, by introducing the novelty of Blue Visby, the vessel is performing a Blue Visby voyage that prolongs the ocean passage. And by prolonging the ocean passage, there is a financial consequence. We call that ocean passage prolongation amount, which is 23,000. It is calculated by Blue Visby. That then is paid by the charterer to the ship owner. The charterer also pays demurrage, but he pays less demurrage because the vessel was delayed in tendering notes of readiness. But here's the difference. Share of fuel savings. Even though it's a voyage charter, the ship owner gives to the charterer 50% of the fuel savings as calculated by Blue Visby. That produces a net financial position that is better than business as usual by $7,000 at the voyage level. And the same can be seen in the last column, which is the owner's column, where you can see that the owner is also better off by about $9,000 compared to business as usual. On top of that, what have we delivered in terms of fuel or energy or carbon savings? We have delivered a 17% AER improvement. So that is a summary of the outcome of a Blue Visby voyage. Now, I'll say a few things about the process flow. A Blue Visby voyage is a process. It is a sequence of steps. On this diagram, we don't have time to go into the detail, but you can see the role played by the charterer at the top, the owner, the vessel, and the Blue Visby Tower. Blue Visby Tower is the name we've given to the Blue Visby Operations Center. And you see how different people do different things at different stages, from the commencement, the progression of the voyage, through to the end of the ocean passage and the Blue GA statement. In the time we have, I'm going to identify two key elements, two key stages that the Blue Visby system is active in and provides information to the stakeholders. The first is the generation of the Blue Visby recommended time of arrival. So the output of the system, after all those algorithms and the software and all those wonderful technological things have done the thing, the Blue Visby system provides a recommended time of arrival that is optimal. How is that optimal? Well, there's a series of optimization parameters and constraints that frame the Blue Visby recommended time of arrival. There's about 20 parameters. They can be vessel related, terminal related, weather related, but also contractual. There are some contractual elements that are parameters and constraints. The most important, though, is what you see on your screen at the bottom of the bullet points, which is the RTA is designed to optimize for energy efficiency, but at the same time for the mutual financial benefit of ship owners and charterers. Unlike any other optimization tool, Blue Visby optimizes for two parties, for the ship owner, for the charterer, not just for one. I will show you in a complex graph that I hope will illustrate the point about common financial interest. Now, this is a graph that shows the dates of arrival on the x-axis and the fuel savings on the y-axis. If we start with the blue line is the fuel curve applied to the arrival time. The later you arrive, the lower your fuel consumption, the more savings out of fuel. But that's simplistic. If you look at the real world, you need to look at how the owner would behave in terms of arrival times in a voyage charter. This is all a voyage charter. And then you look at the green line that shows the owner's financial position by reference to the arrival dates in a voyage charter that happens to be on a SHEX, Sundays, holidays excluded basis, because this is the grains world, the grains trading. And you see here that there is no correlation between the fuel curve and the owner's financial position. What this means is that if you didn't have Blue Visby, the owner would optimize for his pocket, obviously. The reverse is true for the charter's financial position, where you see the purple line. Again, it is completely different. So what Blue Visby does is it optimizes for a point where owners and charterers are both better off within the framework of parameters and constraints. Some parameters have to do with the engine, minimum load, maximum load. Some parameters have to do with the needs of the terminal. A vertical line that says buffer, that is a terminal requirement for a minimum waiting time for ships. And some parameters are contractual. A vertical line there is the cancelling date. So that is how the BVRTA is determined. The vessel then follows the BVRTA because it participates in a Blue Visby voyage. And at the end of the Blue Visby voyage, when the vessel arrives at the anchorage or at a position just off the anchorage, there is the reconciliation of figures. We look at the numbers. The numbers are how much did we save in fuel and how much did we prolong the ocean passage, because those two parameters have financial consequences that we need to share. And here is a very important element of the Blue Visby solution: the methodology for defining, quantifying, and comparing what happened, the actual Blue Visby voyage, with something that never happened, what we call the counterfactual. The vessel will not do the same voyage without Blue Visby. So we need to find a way to define, quantify, and compare a business as usual voyage by the same ship at the same time. We have worked with Blue Visby Consortium member Carbon Trust in considering a number of possible benchmarks until we identified the ideal benchmark for our use. That's how we define business as usual. And then we have worked with Consortium member Bureau Veritas to quantify the actual and the counterfactual, which we do with using digital twins. That probably doesn't matter very much unless you're interested in the detail, but what does matter to those of us on screen today is the money. So this is the Blue GA report. This is the final outcome of the voyage, an actual voyage that happened on a ballast voyage to Western Australia, a port called Queen Anna, the grain terminal. You see the voyage comparison, BAU, business as usual, the benchmarking. The vessel would have done 11.9 knots. The Blue Visby voyage, she did 9.3. The duration of the voyage BAU would have been 9.7 days. The actual voyage is 11.6. Now, those things now need to be assessed by reference to fuel quantities. And we have bunker fuel saved of 39 metric tons, CO2 emissions avoided, and you see an AER improvement. Now, what about the money? We need to take the notional value of time, and we take the number that looks like demurrage rate, but is not exactly demurrage rate, and we call that the OPP rate. There's a methodology for arriving at that. It's about $12,000. And the bunker price, the parties either agree or we take an average of the month of the voyage. At the time, it was $400. It's about, it's much higher now. And we apply the 12,000 to the ocean passage prolongation, which was 1.9 days. And we apply the bunker price of $400 to the $39 metric tons of fuel saved. The value of bunkers now is 17,000. That is shared between the ship owner and the charterer. And the charterer then pays to the ship owner $23,000. That is the value of the ocean passage prolongation. That is an amount of money that is slightly less than demurrage. And it is the amount of money that the ship owner, if you like, sacrificed by not tendering notes of readiness early. So the ship owner is incentivized financially not to sail fast and wait, but to sail slowly, save fuel, share the fuel for the charterer, and receive OPP instead. That is what then takes us to the P&L I showed earlier. You see there is a link between the numbers you saw in the Blue GA statement and the P&L figure of fuel savings for one and OPP, fuel savings for both, and OPP for the ship owner. That's how we come to the positive P&L for both parties. In the deployment, the first company that deployed the Blue Visby solution is a grains exporter in Australia called CBH. And it is interesting to see what the head of shipping at CBH, how she describes her experience of Blue Visby. She doesn't talk about emissions. She says both parties are better off. So the main motivation for somebody who's head of shipping is, of course, to improve the profit and loss account for the company. Over the last 12, 13 months of deployment, there have been about 20 or 25 completed Blue Visby voyages involving 7 grains terminals in Australia. Charterers, voyage charterers, CBH, and another Australian charterer called Grain Corp. Average fuel savings comfortably in the double digits, about 13%. The average P&L improvement for each of ship owner and charterer of about 6,000. At the time, of course, the fuel price was much lower. And the voyages were completed with the involvement of about 45 ship owners and operators because some charter parties were in chains. So that is the present status of the Blue Visby solution, deployment in Australia and expanding. That is all from me. I know we will have a lot of time for discussions. I will stop sharing and over to Sarah.
Thank you, Harris. That was an incredibly helpful presentation there. So thank you very much for taking us through that. I think it would be worth at this point me just kind of, if I put that in context as well, kind of that wider context about in the shipping industry about decarbonisation and why maritime is needing to decarbonise. So I'll just very briefly kind of go through the next couple of slides before we move into that panel discussion. So obviously we're in this rapid transition stage, and so kind of really looking at what the key drivers are for decarbonisation in maritime. So obviously we've got the IMO greenhouse gas strategy. The revised greenhouse gas strategy was adopted in July 23, and that sets an ambitious pathway for shipping's decarbonisation. So that sets clear levels of ambition and indicative checkpoints for 2030, 2040 and 2050, culminating in reaching net zero at or around 2050. The strategy also requires an accelerated uptake of zero or near zero greenhouse gas fuels. Alongside that, we've obviously seen regulatory frameworks both at that global and also regional and national level. So at the IMO level, obviously we're seeing EEXI, CII, and then obviously regional level, EU ETS, fuel, EU maritime, and we also have the UK ETS, which is also coming in. Also improving energy efficiency, so a continued push for greater vessel and voyage efficiency as a practical and also an immediate rather lever for that emission reduction. There's also the driver of that environmental and social responsibility alongside innovation and market expectations. So together, all of these forces make decarbonisation not just a regulatory requirement, but also an operational and commercial one. So then looking at that kind of role of operational efficiency and that, what it plays in this transition to low carbon shipping and the benefits it offers as well. So obviously there's those efficiency improvements which can be implemented straight away using existing vessels, existing systems and existing infrastructure. Obviously addressing behavioural inefficiencies as well. So obviously the Blue Visby solution is looking at that sail fast then wait and changing that. Also, optimizing operations can reduce fuel consumption and emissions substantially, and often that's at no additional cost or a low cost. And also, smarter voyage planning and arrival management can improve that overall supply chain coordination and reduce congestion and improve port turnaround times. So obviously we've had that overview from Harris telling us what the Blue Visby solution is. So this slide is just very much a kind of snapshot summary, high level overview. So obviously optimizing vessel arrival times, providing vessels with that coordinated data informed arrival window in order to avoid unnecessary speeding and waiting. And as I say, eliminating that sail fast then wait approach. So there's that calculated optimal arrival window using multilateral algorithms to determine that most effective arrival time based on real conditions and constraints. And as Harris has touched upon, the potential there to reduce emissions by around 15%. So we'll move now into the panel session. And I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our second guest, Paolo. So Paolo, would you like to just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your involvement with Blue Visby and the work that you've been doing?
So hello everyone, I'm Paolo. So I'm a researcher at the Tynall Centre for Climate Change Research, which is based at the University of Manchester. And I'm part of a team which we all focus about shipping, and we all look at shipping from different sides. And I specifically look at arrival optimization solutions, which are sometimes coupled with the weather routing. This is my expertise, more or less. I've been working with the Blue Visby solution since 1 year, 1.5 now. So yeah, that's it, I guess.
Thank you, Paolo. That's great. And I would just add at this point that obviously please do add any questions from the audience as well, either in the chat or there's a Q&A section as well. So Paolo, if it would just stick with you for a moment, I was just wanting to kind of touch a bit more upon the kind of the benefits of Blue Visby. So what role do you see Blue Visby playing in helping fleets comply with tightening CII ratings and also Scope 3 emissions reduction?
Sarah, as you said, we are going through a phase till 2050, which will be characterized by progressively more stringent measures. Whether those will come from Europe, those will come from the International Maritime Organization, measures will be tighter. And this means that it's likely to become progressively more expensive to keep the business the way it is today. So the Blue Visby solution is a way to cut costs. At the very base, it's a way to cut costs with the positive that cutting costs translates into cutting emissions. And this is going to be crucial, especially if we do not have the technology to counteract the requirements from international organizations.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Paolo. And just kind of sticking with those benefits, and this is a question for both Harris and Paolo, so please both jump in. Beyond emissions reduction, what other secondary benefits have been observed already through the trials so far?
The main point of the trials has been the operational elements and the P&L. So it has the main focus has been to test and demonstrate financial benefit for ship owners and for charterers. At the research stage, which was before the trials and during simulations and studies, we have had very interesting findings from our academic friends. So Manchester University produced a study that showed the impact of Blue Visby on the carbon budget, which is not exactly the same as saying cutting emissions. It's to do with the budget, the carbon budget. The Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, another consortium member, produced a fantastic study on the effect of sail fast and wait on mortality, the pollution load that basically people die because of sail fast and wait. It has a measurable increase in mortality worldwide. And an NGO, an American NGO called Ocean Conservancy, produced a study on the impact of Blue Visby on underwater radiated noise, underwater noise pollution that is reduced by about 40%, and the risk for striking whales, which is again reduced by about 35 or 40%. These are the collateral or the co-benefits. There's one additional co-benefit that was discussed within the consortium but never modeled, which is the improvement in anchorage safety, because you have fewer ships waiting and they wait for less time. So these are the elements of the co-benefits beyond the finances.
Thank you. That's great. And I don't know if you had anything else to add to that, Paolo.
Well, I just want to add that if you going back to your original questions about benefits, the Blue Visby solution is a solution which is an overall optimization. Okay, so meaning it can it doesn't have to be the only one. It can easily coexist with many other solutions which are being developed from both academia and industry, because we tackle the navigation aspect of today's maritime industry, and because we adjust speed basically. Nothing forbids the Blue Visby to be used in combination with, for example, wind propulsion or in combination with renewable fuels. It's just that, in my view, Blue Visby comes before all of this, and it comes naturally that the potential here it's really big, because the amount of savings, the amount of reducing, the amount of emissions which can be reduced, can only escalate very quickly.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Paolo, for that. So just moving to the chat, I see we've got some questions which have been added. So Harris, the first one seems to be for you. So the solution clearly works very well. and very effective amongst the possible solutions we see for reducing emissions and voyage costs. What are the initiatives needed within the industry required for better implementation?
It is a matter of adoption. So within the consortium, we worked for years in testing and refining and proving, but from this point onwards, it's all a question of willing participants, ship owners and charterers, to deploy, to start using it. Deployment is recent, so with the trials and the deployment has only been going on for about a year. It is a fresh solution, it is a fresh system as a deployed reality. It has some history as a research project, but as a deployed reality is new. So it's just a matter of more and more ship owners and charterers willing to test it and to use it. But it doesn't require anything else from a regulator, if you see what I mean, because it doesn't rely on subsidies or on carbon taxes. It works because the financial outcome is better for both ship owner and charterer. It makes sense today. It will make more sense, like Paolo said, tomorrow and the day after, with more where fuels are more expensive and perhaps more carbon taxes.
Thanks, Harris. That's really helpful. And I think the next part of the question is kind of touching on you've said there about where Blue Visby is at now and how long it's been going for. And the next part of the question is saying, obviously the solution has existed for some time. What are the major roadblocks in your opinion? So what roadblocks or hurdles have you had to be overcome?
That's a very good question. Except that, as I said, it's still new. So you still need to educate and explain. But the roadblock, if you were to choose one roadblock, I would say it is the industry's attachment to business as usual. So we're all conservative. And remember, I'm a maritime lawyer, so I'm probably the most conservative of everybody. So everyone is conservative. Nobody wants to change things. But at the same time, we should remember that our industry is uniquely adaptable. So look what's happening in the world today with wars and all of those problems we're seeing. Our industry adapts. So Blue Visby is something that helps the industry adapt, become more resilient, reduce costs, adapt to what we need. But it is fundamentally persuading people to do certain things slightly differently.
Thanks, Harris. So I think we'll come on now, kind of continuing with the questions in the chat. The next couple are really looking at how the Blue Visby solution works. So asking, is it a service that's purchased? If so, what's the pricing? And then also, how is that dealt with in a charter party or between charterers and owners? Is there, what clauses need to be included, and how is transparency achieved? I don't know if you can elaborate on that as well.
I think that's also for me. I'm sorry, Paolo, this is more operational than conceptual. So is it a service that can be purchased? Yes and no, because it is a systemic solution. It cannot be purchased by an individual ship owner or an individual charterer. It is an intervention to a charter party, and it requires both the ship owner and the charterer to want to do it. And what is the pricing? For the time being, the pricing is linked to the fuel saving. So it is a percentage of how much fuel saving is delivered. The next angle to the same question is clauses in the charter party. Yes. One of the components of the Blue Visby solution is contractual amendments. We call them the Blue Visby riders. They're necessary because otherwise the system doesn't work. So we have operations, we have software, we have technology, but for all of those things to perform their magic, you need certain amendments to the charter party. How is communication achieved? There is a portal, there is an interface, there's technology about communication, and the same about transparency, the methodology, what goes into the calculations for the voyage sharing is all transparent between ship owners and charterers. It is not visible to anybody else. So it's transparent between the participants, but it's not announced to everybody else who does Blue Visby voyage or beyond that.
Thank you, Harris. That's really insightful. So the next question is looking at kind of the real life case studies. It says that it seems like the real life case studies are more successful in optimizing for longer voyages. What is the implication for tankers, which only have 1 or 2 days sailing between load and discharge ports? I don't know, Paolo, do you have any comments on that from your research?
Yeah. So what we found is so if you have a longer voyage, you have more time, so your cumulative fuel savings will be bigger, but simply because you will be slow steaming for longer. What we didn't find really a correlation between length and saving is when we look at relative savings, because relative savings are, on the contrary, directly linked to what other ships are. What other ships are doing. This is a systemic optimization. So the savings of each individual ship depend on what the system is doing. So yes, it's true. If the voyage is longer, then you optimize for longer, so your savings will be bigger in absolute terms. Yes, this is true. And sorry, I forgot the second half of the question. Well, I think if the voyage is shorter, in the case of like a 1 or 2 days, 1 or 2 day passage, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you also have less expenses. So in the end, what you really want is to look at your relative savings, because that's relative savings, which is trying to pull down or pull up, because we have a savings like to try to exploit as much as possible. Shorter voyages probably are associated with smaller costs, lower costs, but might have the same amount of relative savings as bigger voyages. So from the Blue Visby perspective is not really a matter of the length of the voyage. Doesn't really matter if we look at the relative savings.
Thanks, Paolo. Did you have anything to add on that, Harris, from the trials?
No, it's all spot on. You know, it's a question whether you want to look at absolute or the relative, the percentage. What perhaps I would add is that it adds up if you have a shuttle tanker that does the 1-2 day voyage 20 times in a month. So when we in fact we are doing a pilot now for the last few months, and still goes on with MOL in Japan, who are interested in a use case that involves vehicle carriers that also has relatively short voyages, but the benefit is cumulative over a period.
Thank you. So we've got a couple more questions in the chat, so I'll come to those next. So the next one is, does Blue Visby also account for the additional main engine maintenance costs that may arise due to prolonged slow steaming? I don't know who'd like to take that first.
Maybe I can try without being a ship engineer, marine engineer, but looking at what the feedback has been in all the work. One of the parameters and constraints that I spoke about earlier is the minimum engine load of the particular vessel. So it's not about speed, it's engine load. And it is up to the ship owner to choose what they regard as their minimum engine load for the particular voyage. It may have to do with using auxiliary blowers. It may have to do with maintenance. And that's a matter for the ship owner. What we've seen in the deployment is that you have ship owners and chief engineers and captains who initially say, well, I will never go below 11 knots. But then when they realize what the benefits are, all of a sudden they do 9 knots. So we've seen that in real life, these things are a little bit flexible, and all it takes is for the chief engineer to see a benefit in something, and then they will adapt. There may be maintenance costs, certainly for the auxiliary blowers, if you choose to operate them. But don't forget, there will also be a benefit in reduced hull fouling, because you have fewer waiting days, especially at the warmer water ports.
Yeah, maybe if I can add, I would just say, yeah, I mean, every time when the optimization is going on, the model suggests, a possible recommended time of arrival, but the decision is always made by the captain or by whoever is sailing the ship, and the suggestion always it's meant to be taking into account engine load range, as you said, Harris. We not be suggesting unfeasible speed, or there will be cases in which the speed might, like, the best optimum speed might be like 5 knots, but we know 5 knots it's way too low, and it will never be achieved. And also, so as I said, the difference between 11 knots or 9 knots, it might sound really small, but the fuel consumption is squared, or it depends on the model, but either square or cubed to the speed. So even a very little amount of speed reduction can really boost fuel consumption reduction. So it's in the end, it's just, I guess probably the question would be, where is the balance? Where is this very fine balance? But this is handled by the model. So it's just a matter of taking the decision of slowing down.
Thank you for those insights. So the next question, if we move on to that now, is laden passage optimization in a voyage charter is understandable, but how is the Blue Visby solution optimizing the ballast passages, as the ballast speed are mostly freight market driven?
That's a fantastic question, and thank you, Manu, for raising it. The 20 voyages I mentioned of the last few months of deployment have all been ballast voyages, not laden. There have been a few laden, but the majority has been ballast voyages. So in a ballast voyage under voyage charter, you have, of course, a freight rate. The freight rate is fixed, whether it's per ton or it's a lump sum, it is fixed. The demurrage rate is fixed. Now, when you refer to the freight market, I think you are thinking in terms of how long will it take for the vessel to load and discharge so that she's then released back into the market. But it's important here to recognize that Blue Visby does not prolong the voyage. The vessel will berth at the load port and will berth at the discharge port at exactly the same time. The vessel will complete loading operations and will complete discharge operations at exactly the same time as without Blue Visby. All that Blue Visby does is to swap waiting time for steaming time. So in that sense, it does not affect the utilization of the ship over a year. It is not affected by the freight rates. So Blue Visby can work either laden or ballast. It's just that we have different parameters. For ballast, we have the parameter of the cancelling date, the lake hand. So our Blue Visby riders, our contractual intervention, introduces a constraint of the cancelling date. And in fact, it goes one step further. One of the innovations of the Blue Visby contractual architecture is to say that if the Blue Visby recommended time of arrival comes later than the cancelling date, in other words, if the optimal for carbon, optimal for energy, optimal for the pocket of the ship owner, optimal for the pocket of the charterer, if you have that optimality that is later than the cancelling date, then our contractual architecture says the cancelling date is pushed back. So we have a dynamic cancelling date if the parties will be better off from it. So both ballast and laden with certain different parameters.
Thank you, Harris. That's very helpful. So the next question I've got is just about the ports and their role in this as well, because obviously presumably there's a real need for ports to be involved in Blue Visby Solution in order for it to reach its full potential. So I don't know if you're able to elaborate a little bit more on that. I know you discussed earlier the consortium members and who's involved, and I just wondered if that was something else you could touch upon.
Yes. So we have consortium members who are port authorities and terminals. Ports and terminals are important, but it's also important to emphasize that we do not interfere with the lineup. We do not interfere with the ports and terminals. We take the needs for what they are. In this sense, Blue Visby is not a just-in-time project. Sarah, I don't know if we have time, because there were some additional slides I can show to explain the link with ports and terminals. It's entirely up to you if you think I can have 3 minutes on that, or we have many more questions.
There's one more question in the chat, so you've got a few minutes if you like.
All right, then if I then take control of the slides and scroll to something we didn't have time to show earlier, and is to do with the role of ports and why and how. I think you can see a slide that says what is the role of ports and terminals. So let's go a little bit deeper. Different ports and different terminals organize their systems, the berthing of ships differently. They can be split in 3 main categories. Ports where the terminal controls the lineup, ports where the port authority and not the terminals control the lineup, and ports that are first come, first served, meaning there is no system. Whoever comes in, goes in first. Now, Blue Visby is designed to work for each of those different models or interfaces. I have a simple diagram here that shows terminals that operate a lineup. The polygon represents all the factors on land, terminals, port authorities, blah, blah, blah. Now, the terminal has a lineup. That's the point where the terminal touches the group of ships, touches the system. In that use case, the Blue Visby Solution algorithm treats the terminal lineup as a constraint so that optimization happens for all those other parameters, in addition to the need of the terminal for ships to arrive at a particular time and with a particular order. Of course, even ports and terminals that have a terminal lineup, that lineup is dynamic. It changes. It is not always the same from the beginning. And that's the reason that you need the complex algorithm to take that into account. Now, the next one is where port authorities determine the lineup. In that case, the Blue Visby Solution, and you see that the dots are representing ships that do Blue Visby voyages, the algorithm treats the port authority lineup as a constraint and optimizes for that as well as for everything else. Now, what is perhaps different is to look at terminals that are first come, first served. First come, first served. No system. For that use case, the Blue Visby algorithm does something that is different. It treats as a constraint a requirement that the Blue Visby participating vessels, the vessels that are doing a Blue Visby voyage, are not overtaken by non-participating ships. So we accept a higher speed, meaning a worse optimization, a worse fuel saving, because we treat as paramount, we treat as number one priority, the commercial priority not to be overtaken. And it is for that reason that in first come, first served terminals, the outcome, the benefit of Blue Visby is not as high, but it is still higher, better than business as usual. And if you remember this slide I showed earlier with the parameters and constraints, I didn't talk about the second and third column, but you see there second and third column highlighted in yellow, parameters and constraints that are unrelated to ships and have everything to do with the terminal's own requirements and whether the berthing model is first come, first served or not. I think I can stop sharing. And that was, I think, Sarah, the answer to the question.
Thank you, Harris. That's really helpful, and thank you for those additional slides and talking us through that. The visuals are very helpful. So there's one final question I think we've got time for, just a couple of minutes left. So is the rate of percentage on fuel saving, basically the price of Blue Visby, taken into account when the final better off figures are calculated? And are these calculations displayed to the owners and charterer?
Yes, so we need to determine the fuel saving, because that fuel, let's say that you have a fuel saving of $25,000. Half of that will go to the ship owner, half of that will go to the charterer, and Blue Visby will take a percentage of that. So everybody needs to see the mathematics. How is that calculated? That is calculated on the basis of a methodology that is transparent, open, and it's neutral. It is the same for every voyage, and it is neutral. It is what we have designed together with Carbon Trust and with Bureau Veritas.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Harris. So obviously we're coming to the end of the webinar now. Just got a last few minutes. So what I'm going to do is put up a slide to show, apologies, I've just had to get this slide deck back up, and I'm just getting to the right slide to show contact details. So obviously, please do feel free to reach out to myself. My email address should be on the screen now, and there's also the contact details for Harris and Paolo as well. These slides will be shared afterwards. We will send out an email with the slides and a recording. And you'll see on the next slide, there is also a contact email address at the Blue Visby Solution, which is specifically for NorthStandard members and brokers if you're wanting to find out further information. So obviously, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to everyone for joining us today, and also for our guest speakers, Harris and Paolo, for their time and expertise and the thoughtful insights that they've been able to share with us. So their presentations and contributions to the panel discussion have been incredibly informative and have shed great light on the practical as well as the legal and technical perspectives surrounding operational efficiency and the Blue Visby solution. You've helped us unpack not only how the system works in practice, but also that wider role that operational efficiency can play in driving meaningful emissions reductions straight away. So it's been a valuable discussion. Thank you very much. We really appreciate the depth and clarity you've brought to the session, and thank you once again to everyone for joining us today.